life, liberty, and other things I believe in. This week, I thought it would be good to state some of my views explicitly for a few reasons. 1, to contextualize what I write. 2, to give new readers a quick introduction. And 3, to spark discourse around ideas that may pique your interest. I believe we must center humanity. When we center profits and power, we neglect life. White, abled, neurotypical, cishet Christian is not the default worldview. When we center everything around this identity, we increase struggles, erase cultures, censor creativity, and obstruct innovation. All people deserve equal respect and kindness because no one is lesser or greater than anyone else. We should not oppress anyone for any reason. Until we stop oppressing people, those with privilege must use that privilege to uplift those who are oppressed. Oppression is systemic. As long as our system relies on oppressions, we will continue to learn them. We should take no life, human or other animal, needlessly. If survival is not at stake, there is no need to kill. We are harming the planet at an alarming rate, which continuing wasteful, capitalistic ways will not alleviate. We are stronger together than we are separate. When we work together, we can achieve our goals quicker, easier, and with less suffering. Equitable housing, food, healthcare, education, and potable water should be available and accessible for all people. Mutual aid is more effective than legislation, as legislation is often the problem. We must be aware of how our actions affect others now and in the future. We should focus on education and health services over incarceration and capital punishment. All people have inherent worth. We should not be tying a person's worth to their productivity or to how well they assimilate into the majority culture. Those who labor should benefit from their labor. We have healthier relationships when we work out our own issues first, both as individuals and as a country. Having rich folks controlling the country is bad for poor folks. The rich will always allow into power those who further their own agendas, leaving the rest of us to suffer. Police exist to protect the wealthy. They are not here to serve the rest of us. Any market with only 2 major options, neither of which fully serve consumers, is not a free market. Similarly, a government with only 2 major parties, neither of which serve citizens, is not a true democracy. Our government was designed this way. There's nothing to fix. We need change, not reformation. This list isn't exhaustive, but I feel it gives reasonable context for what I write. I think it also helps to show how similarly many of us believe, even if we don't claim the same belief systems. Exploring what we agree on helps us realize we can work together to achieve common goals to benefit us all, regardless of how we identify. Basically, if I had to kind of summarize what I believe in, it's, actually that first one probably makes a lot of the rest of them fairly obvious. I think it's important to remember that people are people. As simple as that sounds, sometimes it's easy to forget when, especially in the United States. I will say, I know, on Twitch, it's so easy to tune in from around the world. But my experience is living in the US. And so that's where my worldview comes from. And that's what I talk about when I talk about my experiences. And just living in such a capitalistic society, it's sometimes easy to forget when, everything costs something. It costs you something to survive, and you can't afford that unless, you're working. And it's just, work becomes so primary for so many people that whether they want it to be or not, I mean, some people work multiple jobs just to get by, and they would love to spend more time with their family. They'd love to be doing something fun and relaxing, but they can't. And, other people get so wrapped up in chasing a bigger paycheck that, they forget what it's like to, leave a little time for humanity in their life. But yeah, I feel like kind of the rest of these, in some regards, kind of fall in, just to remember that we all may be human, but we're not all the same. And I know that it's really easy to go into a discussion thinking, okay, my view is the right one because that's my experience. Because not everyone, I would argue the vast majority of people do not have the same experience, even when people have similar experiences. You can go through the same event. For example, this pandemic. I mean, some of us got more productive, some of us got less productive. Some of us, like me, I fell into a bit of a depression and didn't do much of anything except for binge watch Netflix for a couple of months. And then I came out of it running with these 4 For Now blog posts. And just some people have kept their jobs the whole time and they haven't had to think about it. And some people have been unemployed the whole time, or, their job was eliminated because of the pandemic. All sorts of different experiences from one event. And I think it's important to remember that. And I know I don't always do that. I don't want to deny the responsibility for it, but part of it is I'm so used to jumping to my defense, like when someone says, oh, that's not my experience. And it's like, well, I'm not wrong, but I'm not, but my experience also isn't theirs. And I think that's, I just think if we were okay with taking a breath and taking a moment to remember that we all have different experiences, but we're all still human, that a lot of our conversations could go differently. Anyway, so I'm just gonna, centering humanity. We must center humanity. When we center profits and power, we neglect life. And I guess I, already touched upon this, but I worked about 10 years in retail. And I know, a lot of service industries probably have similar experience of not feeling sent, like, oh, the employee isn't necessarily who's important here. Because I know, I'm from Massachusetts, and so, during the winter, we'd have big snowstorms, and of course, we were still expected to show up to work. I remember one day, when was it? Almost a decade ago now, we had a really huge snowstorm, and the governor had declared a state of emergency and was closing roads, and I was the last one at the store. Because I was a manager and we had to stay open. As a manager too, I mean, at least when you're just, a cashier or something, like, you're kind of bottom of the hierarchy, so it feels pretty tough. But then as a manager, it's like, well, you gotta show up. You're expected to be there if they tell you you need to be there. So, I had to wait until, our regional manager said, it's okay, you can close up shop now. I had to make sure, all the customers were out. I had to make sure all the other employees were out. And then I finally got to go. But it's like, I don't even remember what I was making at that point, like 12 or 13 bucks an hour, I think. And, I'm risking my life to get to or from work. And that never sat right with me. I would often, not at the same place, at another place I worked, they would often call me on my usually one day off a week. Every now and then I got 2 days off a week. They'd call me in and say, hey, we're short, could you come in? Which, I'm not gonna lie, it was always a struggle because, yeah, I want my day off, but working extra hours means I get a little bit more of my paycheck. And sometimes you choose that because that's the difference between, am I gonna eat every day this week? So, your self-care kind of falls by the wayside. And the one thing I loved, sarcasm, is every year for my performance review. They had a scale, and depending on how you ranked, whether, you exceeded expectations, met expectations, whatever the ranks were, you could get up to a 50-cent an hour raise. My voice is not fully recovered from Tuesday yet. But of course, they didn't want to give you the full 50 cents because that would mean there's no room for improvement. And there's always room for improvement, according to, the manager in charge of the performance reviews. So, for me, like, I always go above and beyond, and I know better to, or at least, I know when it's not worth it to go overboard, but I still haven't got the sense to not do it. And I do. I mean, I would get my work done hours early and ask around to the other managers and say, hey, what can I, is there anything I can help you with? Just so I could keep busy, because if I wasn't keeping busy, they'd send me home, which again was great because then, I don't have to be at work, but then the paycheck's smaller. So, it's a constant weighing of the decisions, do I get to live my life and, support my life, or do I have to work to pay for it? So it gets, I'm sure I don't have to tell a lot of you, but it gets exhausting having to think about that all the time. I worked in the job where they would call me in on my day off and they wouldn't give me the full raise. I'm not naming names because it's one of the few companies that still exists. That I've worked for, but this one is still around, so I'm not going to name any names. But see, I've talked myself out of my point. Oh, I remember what I was saying now. I would work 7 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon. And, on paper, that sounds really great. I've got my whole evening. I would come home, turn on the television, and fall asleep on the couch until dinner time because I was just so exhausted. So I've kind of, so far, we've been talking about centering humanity and how sometimes it can be kind of hard. In the U.S., it's all about, working so we can make money, so we can pay the bills. Or, on the other side of life, it's, making more money so we can do whatever we do when we're rich. I don't, they pull strings behind the scenes to hurt the rest of us, as far as I can tell. I don't know what else they do. Golf, I guess. Not to say that some rich folks don't do useful things. I don't want to, well, we tend to make generalizations, and sometimes it's because the generalization works, and it's how our brains work. And I think we need to be a little more forgiving to people when they say, oh, this is my experience with this group of people, because it happens a lot when you say, oh, men are jerks. That's like, well, not all men. Well, true, but when you have this experience over and over again, it starts to feel that way. On the other hand, you definitely have to be careful with your language too, because you don't want to say something that actually hurts people. It's okay to call things out if someone's being, unfair or hurtful, but you don't want to, do that back. Yeah, and that's the thing is, when you come back with that, it's like, okay, I recognize not all, but that's also not the point I was making. It's one thing if someone's language is confusing. If you truly don't understand what they're saying, by all means ask for clarification. But when it's something simple and straightforward and you're nitpicking on, the wording or how it was said or the tone, rather than responding to the actual message, that doesn't help either. Anyway, so yeah, I was sharing my experiences in retail, how, from whether I was a cashier or a manager, it was more about, oh, we need you to be doing the work. We need you to be here. We're not going to pay you more than you have to, because of course, they're worried about the bottom line because they have certain metrics they have to hit to get their raise. And so, yeah, it's all very money oriented when you're living under capitalism, and it's easy to forget or to feel like you just don't have the time to humanize things. Anyway, so I was just about to share, I know I had started saying a couple of times, and then I get myself off track, that I've been lucky that even though, I've been in these lower paying jobs where I always have to choose, do I want time for myself or do I want to take them up when they say like, oh, can you come in on your day off? Or, or if they want to send me home early one day and it's like, well, I could use the time off, but I need the paycheck. I have been relatively healthy. I've never had to be on a medication, which, in the US, it's out of control. And I had found, I'll bring this up. I didn't realize how many different brands of insulin, how many different ways it came. I've never directly had to deal with that. I have friends, I have family who have to take insulin, but I've never had to, so I had no idea. But I mean, look at this range. You get, they still sound kind of expensive, but the generic stuff is, $64 for a dose. Granted, they said somewhere in here, I think it's down at the bottom, that people, I don't know if this is like an average or what, but they said people would take like 40 down here. So one insulin unit can be defined as the amount of insulin it takes to lower blood glucose by 50 milligrams per deciliter. Sorry, I'm American. I don't speak sensible units of measurement. So, each individual's response is variable because, again, we're all human, but we're all different. So yeah, it goes on to say that someone with type 2 diabetes may start with 1 unit of insulin per day. 1 unit of insulin per 1 kilogram to 2 kilogram of body weight, so 40 units a day and I'm going to do this math because I don't know what 70 kilograms is. Suppose I could have done this ahead of time. In my extra hour, I didn't know what to do with myself. So someone I haven't weighed myself in years, so I don't actually know what my body weight is. But so someone around my size would take 40 units of insulin a day. So if your insulin costs 60, and I'm just going to go ahead and assume that a pen is 1 dose, because I believe EpiPens are 1 dose. This is how I have no idea. I'm not a doctor, obviously. So I'm guessing that would be $64 per unit, and then you've got to take 40 a day. That gets a little costly, a little, and that's the cheap stuff. I mean, some of the prices get up into the like $800-900, and some of those are for vials. So I don't know if that changes anything if that's more than 1 dose. But my point is, like, that's ridiculous. That's very expensive. And the thing I was going to show you, but I clicked the wrong one, is insulins, like, those aren't even the ones at the top of the list for most expensive drugs in the US. This one, like, I can't even wrap my mind around this. So this is from GoodRx, and I think I started to say this and then forgot I was saying it earlier. It's one of those like discount cards you can sign up for free, and FamilyWise is also does this. You can sign up for a free card that will actually get you some discounts on prescription medication, which is super cool for people who need medication and can't afford full cost. So they have the 20 most expensive drugs in the US listed, and look at this. Number 1, $86,000. Like, I don't even know what it's like to make that much money, let alone have to spend that much money. And I laugh because that's my coping mechanism. I mean, this is scary and gross. That, I mean, granted, if someone's lucky, they have insurance that covers most of this, I hope. But yeah, so, they explain all the drugs a little further, but this $86,000, that's for a month. That's for a month of this drug. Like, I can't even imagine having to need a drug that expensive, knowing how much US healthcare sucks. Anyway, I'm diving a little deeper into medicine costs than I guess I had planned to, but I knew things were expensive, but that kind of blew me away. But it's given me a new appreciation for the times I'm not feeling sick. I've ended up in the ER a couple of times, but I've not had to continuously take medication. And this whole thing is exacerbated because, we're like working ourselves till we're sick and tired. So then we go, to get help from the hospital. They put us on medication because, of course, that's how they make money, and everything can be solved by medication, right? Yeah. Oh, I hear you. I'm glad to hear that dropped so much. That's great. Because, yeah, I mean, I actually, I used to work for a a local nonprofit that partners with FamilyWise, actually. And yeah, when I first learned about it, I was like, are we sure this is legit? But yeah, we had a lot of good feedback from it. And so I'm glad to see that, you know, people are getting help that way. Cause yeah, man, I felt like I couldn't afford my life, and I've lived alone for a good portion of my adult life. I've only had to support myself. I don't have pets. I don't need medications. I've just, and I still haven't felt like I could afford my life. So it's like I can't even imagine just how much more stressful it is to know that you've got these extra expenses that, just aren't properly covered. But yeah, so we're busy working until we're sick, trying to make enough money to afford food and housing. And then, we're sick, so we go get medication, and now, our costs have gone up that whole, because it's all about the profits. It's all about everyone making money. You're working for bosses who are trying to get richer, and then you go get medical help from, insurance industries that are trying to get richer. But yeah, so we're all kind of stuck in this cycle revolving around money, and I'm not a fan. Yeah, I 100% agree. It's, yeah, basic necessities. If you need it to survive, like, you shouldn't be, working your ass off, risking further injury or sickness. Yeah, it's not a decision anyone should have to make. But yeah, so I'm going to move on to the second. I think we're all kind of clear on where I'm coming from on the whole centering money versus humanity thing. Having the idea of a default worldview, or one single human nature. We all have different life experiences. We all, we're socialized in different ways. There's so many things over the course of a life that affect our identities, who we think we are, who other people think we are, how we view the world. That the idea that, everyone's going to relate to one identity is harmful. When we expect everyone to conform to a single identity just because that's the one we're comfortable with, it erases their identity. They don't get to feel like they're welcome or comfortable or get to be who they are. But then it perpetuates the whole idea that, yeah, it's okay to think that we only need to be this one way. And, we end up in situations like we're in now, that we've been in for hundreds of years, where, you have white, able, neurotypical, cishet Christians expecting everyone else to assimilate. And it's, like, why would you want that? I mean, I put a few notes there in the blog post, but I mean, when we spend our time and energy catering to this identity, we're leaving out, for example, because I struggle with this to a small degree, designing things, everything, buildings, and, physical objects and digital experiences are very much designed with able people first. And, for any of you who follow me on Twitter might have seen my current pet peeve is people not using alt text. And it's not for me so much, but I know that, I have people in my circle that need the alt text. Otherwise, they're missing out on whatever is in the tweet. And I like to share, the type of stuff that I write about on my blog. I like to share that kind of stuff on Twitter too. And sometimes it's just easier to share an image, just retweet an image than to, write a Twitter thread about it. But I check now, because it's so often people, and I do it too sometimes when I go to post my own images. Sometimes I forget to put alt text in, but I'll either delete it and do it the right way, or I'll reply with the description in a tweet. But when I spend way too much time on Twitter retweeting. And I just, when I see something I agree with, or I think, oh, I want to share this, I want other people to know this too, I just want to hit retweet and not think about it. But I do think about it, because I know that it's not commonplace yet for everyone to be adding alt text. So we're leaving out a whole segment of the population who, uses screen readers. And, so I've been taking the time, maybe too much time. Was it yesterday? I had a whole thread transcribing an entire thread of images, which, I was determined to do that, because not a single one of the images had alt text. But it's not just that. It's, buildings that aren't ADA compliant. They don't have ramps or elevators so that people with mobility issues and mobility aids can get in, or up to another floor. And the doorways aren't wide enough to accommodate wheelchairs. Not putting Braille on signs for people with low or no vision. And even, fancy sidewalks with all those pretty cobblestones that, get uneven at times, but they look good. Well, that doesn't help if someone's using a mobility aid, like a wheelchair, or, a walker with the wheels on it, or I'm sure there's others I'm not even thinking of. But overwhelmingly, we design for able people. And it's just, so many people get left out that way. And yeah, it makes things harder on the people who weren't even considered when, the design was being made. Erasing cultures. White folks are famous for this. And I say white folks, but I in my brain, I'm automatically including me, because I am, for those of you who can't see me, and probably I sound awfully white too. I feel like I'm fairly obviously white. But we're famous for, we talk down about other cultures, about aspects of other cultures. We'll make fun of things. And often at the same time, we're appropriating those same cultures. Music, for example. It'd probably be easier to name the music genres we haven't taken from Black folks. So many have originated with Black folks. Locks, or as white people call them, dreads. And the whole idea to me is kind of dreadful, so maybe that's appropriate. I don't know if that's an appropriate joke. I don't know if we stole dreads as a name, and then the cultures who actually, where locks actually mean something other than, yeah, I'm edgy and cool. If they had to change what they called it, I apologize. But yeah, we steal hairstyles. I'm sure a lot of us remember the whole kente cloth thing. last summer. I've seen mixed reactions on this, only because, some people have argued it's a sign of respect, and I'm not gonna argue that. It's entirely possible it is, but knowing white folks the way I do, or being as cynical as I am, I suppose, about us, I don't know how deeply they delved into it. I mean, it only took me a few moments to learn that, kente cloth is a symbolic cloth from Ghana. It was traditionally worn more like a toga, and it's the symbolism there. It kind of became more important, more symbolic with Ghana's independence in 1957, and in the U.S. And it sounded in this article I read that it was speculation, probably an educated guess though, that wearing the cloth around the shoulders the way that the Democrats did was a way for students at historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs, the students would wear them at graduation as a way of, asserting their identity, their connection to Africa. So, I question whether they took the time to find that out. And that's the thing, is if you just say, oh, hey, that looks cool, I'm going to do that too, that is 100% appropriation. But no, if you're going to support, like, with my turtle blanket, I didn't just go, to Walmart and find a cheap knockoff, like, oh, that looks native-ish. Like, this is made by an actual native weaver or native designer, and the proceeds are going to actual, they're supporting native youth. And, I took the time to learn a little bit about it, whereas, it's perfectly okay if you're going to learn about, okay, this is how it's traditionally used, and you're not going to disrespect that. And I don't have another example off the top of my head, but, if you take something, well, actually, I guess I can move on to kind of my next point, because we do this to everybody. Yesterday was St. Patrick's Day, and traditionally in Ireland, it's like an actual religious holiday. But in the US, it's usually just an excuse to get drunk and be stupid. And, that's appropriation. Like, if you're just going to say, oh, that's a cool thing, I'm going to do what I want with it, that's appropriation, and that's erasing culture. If you think something sounds or looks cool, then by all means learn more about it. Like, I promise you the real story is cooler than what you come up with. And I'm directing that, at the usual appropriation suspects, because, yeah, there are some people who get by just fine not wanting to appropriate because they do take the time to learn about other cultures. But I have to say, like, for anyone who hasn't switched from appropriating yet, I highly recommend learning the actual stories behind, different aspects of different cultures, because I learned so many fascinating things doing all the reading I do for everything I write about. I don't necessarily remember all of it, but that's what notes are for, right? And censoring creativity is something else. When you keep inviting the same people or the same types of people who have the same types of experiences to the table, they're going to think kind of the same things because they don't have any of that other experience that, might spark new ideas. So when you allow different people in, with different experiences, you're going to get different ideas. And I don't know why people treat opening up the doors to new thoughts as such a scary or bad thing, because there's some really creative people in the world that, if they were allowed into other spaces, just imagine the different collaborations we could have. And I don't have a specific example for that either, but I'm a very creative person, and I even, I don't feel like I'm all that imaginative, but, if I could team up with someone who is super imaginative, because I get kind of I'm not going to say technical aspects. I don't understand a lot about technology, but I guess like the practical aspects, like I can do the research, I can do the work. And sometimes, I have a spark of creativity, but to have someone who's like overflowing with creativity and different experiences, who'd come at it a different way, we could do all sorts of fun things. And like, why wouldn't we want more fun things in the world? And, as far as obstructing innovation, kind of the same argument as with creativity. You let different people give their ideas, you're going to get different ideas. But also, if we're busy policing people's identities and what we think they're supposed to be thinking or believing or acting like, then we're not focusing on real problems, which they'd maybe go away if we spend some time solving them. All people deserve equal respect and kindness because no one is lesser or greater than anyone else. And I stand by that, because lesser and greater does not mean that, it doesn't mean nicer or meaner. You're gonna get nicer people, you're gonna get meaner people, but that doesn't diminish their worth. They're still human, and they're maybe making some mistakes, or haven't done some exploration. But yeah, it doesn't, someone not acting in other people's best interests sucks, but it doesn't make them less of a person. On the level of human life, there's not a hierarchy. I know we've created all sorts of different hierarchies to determine, are they better than me, or, I'm better than them, or whatever. But as far as nature is concerned, there's not a hierarchy. We're all human. we're all worthy of being here. And then, we make good decisions or bad decisions. We should not oppress anyone for any reason. Until we stop oppressing people, those with privilege must use that privilege to uplift those who are oppressed. And, I've written about privilege before. It can be a touchy subject for people who feel unprivileged but still have some privilege, because it's not an all or nothing thing. And yeah, I have 2 For Now articles, one called How Privileged Are We, and one called Politics and Privilege, but that explores how, there's so many different ways that someone can have privilege. Like, I'm white. That's like, that grants me so much privilege that sometimes when I think about, okay, well, I'm also a woman, I'm also not Christian, I'm also disabled, I'm also not, I'm not neurotypical, technically. I do have some mental health issues, and there are certainly times where I feel like, how can I be privileged? Like, men don't listen to me. Able people don't care about my struggles. No one wants to hear about my depression. But there's still my white privilege, and that still affords me the opportunity to go into white spaces and be heard. And if I'm not using that privilege to speak up for other, for less privileged people or differently privileged people, then what am I even doing with it? you know. Um, there are some people who might argue that, you know, it's not on you, but I fully believe it is on people who have any kind of privilege to use that as they can to help others who don't have that privilege. Because, I mean, that's kind of, you know, when you don't, you're kind of, oh, I'm just going to mind my own business. Well, that's what got us into, you know, having entire groups of people being oppressed. But I'm glad that I'm sharing some information that might be new. I love the idea that I'm teaching people something, because I mean, I don't spend a lot of time, probably not as much as I should, thinking about, you know, what it is I truly believe and how I'm acting on it. You know, because it's so easy to say, like, oh yeah, I believe all these things, and then just go on with life. And something that I'm really trying to work on is putting my money where my mouth is, so to speak. But yeah, it's not always going to be money because I don't have an income at the moment. But, you know, taking the actions that proves the words I'm saying, I guess. But Cher, yeah, I absolutely can understand the whole, you know, like, that's too stressful. I can't engage with that. And, you know, I've been there. I think that's where, you know, like self-reflection is, or even exploration, I would say, because, you know, self-reflection sounds kind of like, oh, I'm just going to ponder this. But sometimes you really have to dig deep into, like, your learned behavior, how what you've been taught and how what you've experienced has shaped the way you are. Because, you know, not taking in new information, you know, it could be, you know, at best you're missing out on something. But at worst, it could actually be harmful if you're not learning information that avoids harming others, if that makes sense. Sometimes I hate speaking in generalizations because I feel like I'm not clear. So if I'm not, let me know. Darn it, I did it again. One of these days, I am going to keep a train of thought long enough to get to the last stop. In the meantime, self-exploration, yes. So, you know, reflection is fine, but I think we need to go deeper, because in you know, with your example, Cher, where like, oh, this is too stressful, I don't want to engage. Exploring how you react to things can help you find, you know, well, what is it that's the trigger? You know, is it the amount of information? Is it the type of information? Is it the topic? And you can also learn what your coping mechanisms are. You know, how do I make this easier? Do I need to break it down into smaller chunks of text? Do I need it, you know, translated? Does it need to be in simpler words? Does it need to be in another language? Does it need to be in pictures? You know, do I take in information better through a video rather than through reading an article? And I mean, that's a really simple example of how, you know, taking a look at yourself can help. But I think a lot of the issues we have are, you know, whether it's we are afraid of what we're going to find, we don't really want to do the work, we don't think we have the time to do the work, we don't know how to look inside ourselves. I think a lot of it, and I'm including myself in this statement, because I did, you know, I looked, I'd say this blog post comes maybe more from self-reflection than actual self-examination, because these are the kinds of things that are on my mind a lot. So it was really just, you know, do I truly believe this? What are the right words to get this across? It wasn't really a deep dive, but to actually, you know, take the actions that are needed and to be in the space with, you know, people of different identities, people with different worldviews, people with different beliefs. Like, I need to know myself so that I can interact with them on a level that, you know, doesn't harm me, doesn't harm them. And, you know, a lot of us just haven't done that work. And I think I make a point later. I'm fairly certain I make a point later on in my list of notes, that there are a lot of things that we don't learn because it's not taught in school. Yeah, that's a good point, CJ. And it's hard. I spend the bulk of my time online. I've left the house like 3 times during the whole pandemic. And I never really, you know, created much of I don't have much of a connection to the community around here. You know, there are people I met through my work that aren't necessarily like friends, people I'd spend time with and hang out with outside of the work we were doing. So most of my interactions happen on the internet, whether on Twitch or on Twitter, you know, sometimes in Discord. But it's mostly via text, you know? And so it's really hard, especially if, you know, someplace like Twitter, where you can post something and then someone you know retweets it, and then you get a response from someone you've never interacted with. And you look at what they're saying, and it's like, are they really, like, did they mean that? Do they know what they're saying? And in that case, I find it's really hard. Sometimes, you know, I'll go check out their profile real quick and see, like, do they have a pattern of saying this kind of thing? Or, you know, what's the story there? Because it is really hard to tell when you're just reading a block of text. Like, wait, what's the tone? What was their body language as they were thinking that? And how do I use the words on the screen to tell if this is, you know, they're saying something because they don't know any better and they don't plan to know any better, or, you know, they're talking around the issue. Yeah. And I get that, you know, from the white point of view, because, you know, and it's hard. I'm going to let the words come out of my mouth because I'm going to feel more awkward not saying any, like, sitting here trying to come up with the right words. As a white person who was socialized, and I mean, I see this all the time, you know, reading the tweets from people I follow on Twitter, like, you know, people keep saying, and it's true, like, I have no doubt that there are multiple Americas because the experiences of groups of people are just so vastly different. Like, you know, in the public school in a white area, you know, I grew up in Massachusetts in the suburbs. I think there were maybe 3 Black kids in my graduating class of 254. It just, you know, it didn't, I mean, I had friends, you know, I had friends from the Middle East. I had friends from Eastern Europe. I had friends from Asia. But I didn't have any racial contact. Like, I didn't know what it meant. I knew what racism was because we were taught, like, oh, it's this bad thing that, you know, was fought over during the civil rights era, but, you know, we're good now, which we all know we're not. But, like, it wasn't part of the discussion. So it didn't occur to me that, you know, I had to be aware of, how am I treating these folks with darker skin? And of course, everyone has darker skin than me, and maybe that added to my dissonance, because it didn't seem weird to me. Like I've been made fun of for how pale I am, so it didn't occur to me that, wait, that person's too much darker than me, I should be treating them different. But when you grow up so oblivious, and then finally have someone say, that's, you've been kind of oblivious, this is what's really going on. Your first response, because you're thinking like, wait, everyone in my life was lying to me or not, omitting truths. Because, as a kid, at least for me, like, I put a lot of faith into the adults in my life. I took their word, like, oh, mom and dad say I have to be this way. Okay, I'm going to be this way. My teachers at school say this is the truth. Okay, that must be the truth. And I just, going back to things we're not taught in school, I was never, I have a semester of college under my belt, but in grade school, we're not taught critical thinking. We're taught to memorize what the teacher tells us. That too, yeah, because it's so easy to hide behind, whatever. Some people do it for safety, but you can so easily, throw up whatever random picture, make a screen name that has nothing to do with you. You can say whatever you want and think, oh, well, it doesn't matter. They don't know who I am, so I can say whatever I want. And yeah, and that certainly, I don't know if it complicates things or makes things easier, because then you see them for who they are, but then you don't necessarily know who they are. But yeah, so I get the whole shock of like, this can't be true, that's not my experience. But I also understand like the frustration where like, how can you not see this? Because, I've grown my whole life seeing this side of it. And, I think it goes back to being open to listening to different stories. Because, we're never going to get anywhere if we spend our time saying, this is my experience, so this is correct. You've got to be wrong because that's not my experience. Like that doesn't get us anywhere. How people seemingly uncontrollably take everything personally. Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't considered it with unfamiliar or unknown word usages, but I have definitely noticed, and I felt it in myself too. And I don't know what that is that triggers it. But I feel like I've gotten better about not automatically taking something personally. Like and it kind of goes back to the whole, not all men. It's like, you have to recognize that, when someone's sharing their experience, especially if you've never met this person or never interacted with this person, they're probably not talking about you particularly. And, I do. Sometimes I feel like a moment of, oh my God, why would they say that? I'm not like that. But if you follow that thought all the way through, it's like, I'm not like that, so they're not talking about me. But and I think that goes back to just the way that we're taught in schools is not, we're taught to memorize things so that we can pass a test, so that the school can get its funding. I might be simplifying that a little too much. But I think that's the gist of it. That's, I memorized a lot of things in school. I learned to take tests very well. But yeah, I still struggle with the simple action of thinking for myself sometimes. And, and I notice it a lot when I'm reading news, whether it's, commentary from a friend online, or if I'm reading an actual news article. My initial response is to take it as absolute truth, because it's a news article. This is, they're supposed to be reporting what's happening, right? And I know better. I know how propagandized our news has become. But I still sometimes I'll share it before I've gotten all the way through my thinking. And sometimes I just have to sit back and okay, let me check another couple of sources and make sure that this is something real that I'm reacting to. Yeah, environment is a huge factor. Yeah, it's interesting too. I mentioned how white Massachusetts suburbs are. In one of the towns I grew up in, there's Dean College is in Franklin, Massachusetts. And Franklin was a very, very white place. Like I mentioned, there were, 3 black kids. There were maybe a dozen or 20 people of any kind of color in my graduating class of 250 or so. So I didn't interact with a lot of people of color. My one semester of college was at Dean College in that same town. And in one of my classes, 20 or so kids, I was one of 2 white people. So, that was probably my first, I'm not going to say it's my biggest, but my first, really eye-opening moment, wow, I'm in a whole different world right now, and I'm just right down the street from where I spend all my time. And yeah, and it's when you're around different people all of the time, you don't think anything of it. You've learned from all these different people, and you're used to things being different. Whereas when you grow up with all the same type of people, you're kind of used to things being the same. So even the smallest difference can be what just happened? Now we have to adjust. And I don't mean to say that I don't mean for it to sound like it's an inconvenience. I know it feels that way to people that, you've entered my space. What am I supposed to do with this? I think very much that we need to make the space for people coming into our space, because going back to kind of everything else I've said, when you have all of the same people, you're going to have all of the same experiences, ideas, thoughts, and it's just, who wants that? Absolutely. Yeah, the micro versus the macro. I totally feel that, because I have a hard time grasping big concepts. I will get lost in the weeds, and maybe that's part of why I get so off track and then can't find my way back. I will focus on details to death and still not understand how the big picture comes together. But yeah, empathy is a really good thing to pay attention to too. Which again goes back to the whole, we need to center humanity, because otherwise, we're just talking events and facts and data, and it still doesn't mean anything. Whereas, when you humanize it, when you can empathize with someone else, you connect with them on an emotional level, which is, this is why I'm a writer, because the first draft of my thoughts are never very pretty, but when you connect on an emotional level, you feel the connection versus, yeah, I do not use words well. My point is that I think the connection's a little stronger when you bring empathy into it than if you're just looking at it as data or this thing that happened. Yeah, oh, definitely. And I've, believe me, yeah, I'm always so grateful to the people who have patience with me, because I struggle coming up with the words that, again, when you grow up oblivious to a certain type of suffering or oppression or viewpoint, like if you grow up oblivious to something, you're just going to use language the way you've heard other people use it, and you're not going to know what effect you're having on people. So yeah, to have someone kind of confront you with that, or not even confront, I mean, a lot of people just, hold up the mirror and wait for you to notice what you're looking at. And yeah, it's sometimes, it's like, okay, I see this, but I'm going to keep using the language and the actions I know. But, I hate to say that it takes time, because, it's been hundreds of years. You'd think we'd have our act together by now. But, yeah, my initial thoughts don't always make sense once they've been said aloud. So I'm grateful for the people who are willing to be patient with me, because my intent is to keep learning and keep trying to be better. And I know not everyone can say that, and I know that sometimes you can't tell right away if someone's just paying lip service or if someone's actually going to put the effort into it. So I can understand how that's going to be a whole awareness entering a conversation. And yeah, and reflexive pushback is a great phrase. It's very descriptive, and that's exactly what it is. It's a reflex because, we haven't given ourselves the time to look at ourselves. The whole, if we haven't allowed ourselves to look at how we embody, what we're being shown, then it's going to take us aback. Yeah, and then the whole idea, the counter statement, absolutely, Cher. That, I've always been the kind of person who kind of shies away from conflict. And again, it's something I have to get better at, because, if I'm going to keep avoiding conflict, then I can't use my privilege to, to help other folks with different or fewer privileges, because there's going to be conflict there. If I stand up for someone or something, there's going to be the people around me who are like, why are you saying that? What do you care? And, I still have to stand my ground, or, what's the point of even speaking up? But the whole idea that, someone's inviting you to take a look at how you're interacting with them and you're arguing instead, it doesn't help. Yeah, and that goes back to the whole, not all men thing. And I keep going back to that because I don't want to try thinking of other examples or I'll get lost again. But yeah, like the whole focusing on, oh, that's just a generalization is, well, but that wasn't my point. Read the rest of that sentence. Like, this is the point I'm trying to make. This is how, this is what we need to address so that we can stop saying, all men. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because, I mean, if someone doesn't take the time to, to craft their response, they're not interested in, they're not interested in hearing what you have to say. They're not interested in being respectful. They're gonna say their piece and they're not gonna want to hear anything else. Because yeah, you can do that when you already know what you want to hear or what you want to say, then you don't have to stop and think about it like I have to every time I try to piece two words together. Yeah. Yeah, and that it sucks. And I mean, as far as defense mechanisms, and that goes. I'm maybe just going to skip down because we keep bringing up things that I have. Where did I list it? I think it's under this one because we keep bringing up things that I'm like, we should be taught that kind of stuff. Excuse me. So when I say equitable housing, food, healthcare, education, and potable water should be available and accessible for all people. The reason I say that is that these are all things that are necessary for life. And I recognize that education isn't immediately recognizable as essential to life for a lot of people. And I would agree with anyone thinking like, oh, the math and the history we learn in American public school is not necessarily, life-saving information. But things like critical thinking, personal finances, healthy relationships, survival skills, cooking, preparing for unemployment, all sorts of different things that we go through school learning all these things we're supposed to memorize to pass the tests, and then we're pushed out into the real world, or we defer it for a few years with college, and then we're just suddenly supposed to know how to be an adult. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm still struggling with some of this stuff. But yeah, so I bring that up because, defense mechanisms, I've got all sorts of weird defense mechanisms. And when communication and healthy relationships aren't something that's taught, it's something you have to pick up from people around you, but they don't necessarily know those things either. So we're learning, unhealthy coping skills and ways to interact with people, and it makes things worse. It just perpetuates the issue. Yeah, absolutely. You don't know what you don't know, which is very frustrating. It's something I've keep having to come to terms with because I like knowing all of the things, but it's like the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know. But yeah, listening is a huge thing, and it's really so easy. Like, all you have to do is stop talking and let their words enter your ears. But yeah, I mean, and I can't even begin to generalize because there's just so many different reasons. Yeah, I mean, there's the whole underlying, we've been socialized as a white supremacist country. So that underlies everything we do, everything we know. But then, all of everyone's individual experiences that affect how willing or unwilling someone is to just sit back and let someone else share an experience with them and not have them automatically dismissed or made fun of. Yeah. Intersectionality. I have to say, I know the idea has been around for decades, and I feel like it's just not talked about enough. I follow several different groups of people. I have the Black folks I follow, I have the Indian folks I follow, I have disabled folks I follow, and there are some general overarching themes in a lot of the conversations, but I feel like there's not enough of how they all interplay and how there's I don't want to negate anyone's experiences or suffering, because I know to Black folks the racism is more important, and to disabled folks the disabilities are the focus, but they all stem from this whole white supremacist ableism, sexism. It all stems from the same source, essentially. They're just it's like you have one evil octopus with all these different arms, and you've got racism and sexism and ableism and transphobia and all these different isms. They're all stemming from the same place. And it's like, if we could work together more, and I'm going back to, not being obligated to fix anything. It's bigger than any of us, no one person or small group is going to change what's happening. It's got to be a large scale thing. But I feel like intersectionality is left out of the conversation a lot still. And again, it's not like, we have to say it every time I say oh, this group, is being oppressed right now. I don't automatically have to say, oh, but intersectionality every time. But I just feel like, in the general conversations of, okay, white folks do this, it's like, there's more than one thing. And I'm not even saying that, my ideas are necessarily correct or best. I guess I'm surprised after learning of it. And that's the thing is, I didn't know what it was until last year. So I had never heard the term used in conversation. But now that I know it exists, it's like, how come more people aren't using this word? I know it now. But yeah, and that goes back to, there's just so much, there's so many different issues all playing at the same time. And it's like, we can't do it all. We have to focus. And it's like, and that's why, working together is such a great thing, is because then, you can have groups of people each working on separate aspects, and we can kind of tackle the beast all at once. But, that requires a bit of an increase in empathy and listening and collaboration and all that fun stuff. Yeah. Yeah, defaulting to, because yeah. Again, my first response was to generalize that again, but it is, we're the person who's there for us our whole lives. And our experiences are the most experiences we have over everybody else's in the world. And they shape us the most. And so, yeah, it can be hard. And again, especially when we haven't been taught, or we haven't had that model of seeing people decentering themselves. And I know I do that all the time, because, I talk about all these things, what I believe in and stuff, but it's like my experience is the one that I have. So that's always, my first response is always, well, in my experience, this is how it is. but yeah, then you've just got to remember, like, but that's not the only experience. Other people have other experiences, and it's, you know, you need to remember to open yourself up to listening to that. I can understand that too, Cher. And I get a little flustered when I get off track because I'm very sensitive to that. I've had really bad teachers, not just at school, but, you know, in life, where I've had that same experience. Like they'll talk and talk and talk and talk and talk, and you don't necessarily know what they were trying to say. Um, but yeah, so I get flustered when I get off track because I'm like, oh great, now, you know, I haven't gotten to my point. They're not going to know what I'm trying to say. So I'm like hyper aware of that, and when I'm training people, because I've had to train people for work before, I'll show them something and explain it, and then the second time I explain it, I'll try to explain it a different way, like using different language or showing an alternate way to do it, because I know that sometimes you don't click with, you know, the first message. Sometimes you need to hear it a couple of times. Sometimes you have to hear it a couple of different ways before it really starts to make sense. So I totally hear you on that one. Yeah, and the whole idea of having to compete for everything, like, how did everything become a competition?